Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi.
Today I want to talk to you about a very controversial issue, the legalization of marijuana. There are many misconceptions when it comes to the plant cannabis. People think that it's very harmful and highly addictive. Even though it has a bad reputation, I want to share with you today the truth about marijuana. I want to enlighten you on the fact that it's not as harmful as people may think. Some legal drugs that Americans have access to in their everyday lives, like opioids and over-the-counter prescription drugs, are far more fatal to the mind and body than cannabis is. In a column I read by Dr. Malik Burnett, who is a former surgeon and physician advocate, and Amanda Redmond, PhD, who holds a doctorate in social welfare and teaches classes on drug policy at the University of Berkeley, talk about how marijuana became illegal in the first place. In the 1900s, shortly after the Mexican Revolution, the Mexican immigrants started to come into the States, bringing their culture with them and a plant called marijuana, as we know as cannabis or marijuana today. The media played a huge role in spreading false accusations about the disruptive Mexicans and their bad behavior and marijuana use. What Americans failed to realize was that marijuana and cannabis were exactly the same thing, and they used it in their everyday over-the-counter prescription drugs that they have received for illnesses and when they just had a common cold. In the 1930s, hearings on marijuana law were held, and accusations were brought up that it had the ability to change men of color into violent people who solicited sex from white women, which this shed an even darker light on marijuana. A few years later, the ban was successful, but this was not done to keep citizens safe, but only to control those who they thought were bad people and people of color. They wanted to try to detain and deport the Mexican immigrants. It also happened in San Francisco when the Chinese immigrants came and brought their drugs with them as well. So essentially, the demonization of marijuana was a projection of the detestation on the Mexican immigrants. Today, when we think of marijuana, we still oftentimes think of the negative connotation that comes with it. Today, I want to share with you the truth about marijuana. A common misconception is that it's very harmful and extremely addictive. Millions have tried marijuana, but few become dependent on the drug. In an article called, "Is Marijuana Really Addictive?" it states, "It is certainly true that marijuana is not as physically addictive as heroin and opioids and other narcotics. Although marijuana is still considered illegal in some states and on a federal level, it is not as harmful as alcohol and other drugs." In the legalization of marijuana, an excerpt says that marijuana poses far fewer health risks than alcohol. Studies show that 0 deaths are caused by cannabis, while alcohol has a far substantial amount on the death toll. About 3.2% of total burdens of disease and injury are caused by alcohol. People believe it's bad because that's what the government says. In a letter to Obama, Sven Olaf Carlson declares that in comparison to alcohol, marijuana is just as bad and is highly dangerous, not only for the mind and mental health, but for society at large and those around people who use it. He says this, but he has no logic behind it and no reasoning to support why he believes this. He also believes that it's dangerous for children, but there are no statistics that have harmed children. I understand that marijuana is carcinogenic when smoked, but there are many other ways to consume it. People use edibles like candies, or they even started to infuse it in their everyday meals, which makes it not as harmful because it's not inhaled. And also, when vaping, it's at a lower temperature, so it's not as harsh on your lungs. The new and innovative ways to intake cannabis will not only make it easier for those who need it for medical reasons, but safer and healthier for those who use it for recreational purposes. There are many reasons that people use cannabis. Some seriously ill people use marijuana because they think it is the only thing that will help with their sickness. I saw a video on Viceland of a pregnant woman who used cannabis to get her through her pregnancy. She tried taking other alternative medications, but nothing was working for her. She was throwing up blood and was in extreme pain throughout the days and nights and couldn't sleep. Her husband was very fearful for her life and her babies as well. During their first pregnancy, she's had trouble as well. And before her first pregnancy, she was having miscarriages and stillborns. She started using marijuana, and it helped her not throw up blood and helped her sleep and go through her day pain-free. CPA got involved and found nothing wrong with her baby and let her be. Although people looked down on her, she did what was best for her and her family. Some use cannabis to cope with stress and eating disorders and also PTSD. I've heard many stories of veterans coming from the war and they're prescribed narcotics by the doctors, but they feel like zombies and don't really want to live anymore. They find that marijuana is the only thing that helps them get through their day and not have nightmares and sleep all through the night. They're able to do everyday normal things when they have just a little bit of marijuana. I personally know some people who have sleeping disorders who can only sleep after they've smoked marijuana. In a book called Marijuana Use, Introspectiveness, and Mental Health, it explains the effects of cannabis all depend on the user. Some people say that when they've smoked cannabis, they become more self-aware and connected with others, and that they are more insightful. And this is not only during, but after. They gain a new perspective on life and gain a positive outlook. Others have not had such a great experience because they become paranoid or uneasy feeling during their high. With that being said, how can the government tell you what is best for you and best for your body? The government does not have all the information on all the individual and unique cases. From the American Criminal Law Review, it states, under the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, it is a federal crime to possess, cultivate, and distribute marijuana. It's impossible for the government to understand these cases, so how are they going to say that someone who's throwing up blood or can't sleep from very traumatic dreams from war cannot have something to cope with? About 20% of veterans with PTSD are prescribed narcotics, but most of them quickly want to get off and cope on their own, which is extremely hard. Marijuana, they say, helps lower their stress triggers and anger, and it also tones down their depression. The government has wasted a lot of time and money turning innocent people into criminals because they were charged with possession of cannabis. The legalization and decriminalization of cannabis on all levels would not only be very beneficial to the U.S., but it could also really boost our economy. In a book by Bo Kilmer about the Mexican drug organization traffickers, they talk about how much they have profited from Americans by exporting and selling illegal marijuana. It is estimated they made about $1.1 to $2 billion from their exports across the southwest border. The market for the Mexican DTOs would not be so high if the government would legalize marijuana. They're missing out on a lot of of tax money. And we all know people who, even though marijuana is illegal, they still grow and sell it or possess it. As stated in the Marijuana Outlook Best Stocks to Buy, marijuana is considered the largest cash crop in the United States. According to UN data, it values at about $142 billion, which is a lot higher than coffee, which is about $80 billion per year. Imagine how much money the government would make in taxes if people weren't illegally selling and growing marijuana. In conclusion, the use of marijuana should be legal on all levels, not only for medical but recreational use as well. Marijuana should be more socially acceptable because many Americans feel shameful for using marijuana, even for medical uses. A lot of veterans feel as though they are criminals when they light up just to cope with their PTSD. Many people look down on marijuana users and have very negative views, even though people aren't harming anyone around them. I know that cannabis is not for everyone, and although there is not 100% concrete evidence that cannabis is completely healthy, it is proven to be less detrimental to the mind and body than alcohol and other drugs. The faulty information that the Americans received from the media about the Mexican immigrants and their cannabis use really set America back in the early 1900s. They made false accusations about Mexican immigrants, colored people, and their cannabis use. The government is still incriminating innocent people like veterans and other seriously ill people for trying to get themselves better. We really need to work together to change this.